All right, lads and lasses, welcome to Donovan's Brain. This is a film review of the movie Beetlejuice, which I guess came out this weekend. Yeah, that's essentially the situation. I will be doing this spoiler-free in the beginning, and then halfway through, we're going to go ahead and move on down to spoiler territory, as everyone says, not just the kids. I feel like the millennials own that more so than anybody else. Spoiler territory was something that was very much present with streaming. Anyways, this is the first review of this channel, believe it or not, and I didn't really intend for it to be this movie. Honestly, I never really was that into Beetlejuice. I was never a big Tim Burton fan, but I am a film fan, and I also happened to see the first Beetlejuice on a plane just a couple weeks ago, which is always a great way to get introduced to any movie, is just to watch it on your phone around cramped quarters and a lot of strangers. But actually, it ended up sort of charming me in a weird way. I didn't expect it to. I don't know why I chose it. Maybe it was because I needed something that I hadn't seen, and I also have always been curious about Michael Keaton. He's always been somebody who sort of fascinates me, given the fact that he played Batman and everything. He was always sort of an odd choice for that, and then you throw Beetlejuice in there, which seems like such a weird risk of a character. And anyways, his whole career is kind of an interesting thing. But that viewing experience on my phone of watching Beetlejuice actually made me consider watching the sequel, which tells you that I liked it. Now, getting into the movie at hand, Beetlejuice is the sequel to, I think the first Beetlejuice came out in 1988, and it had Alec Baldwin, Gina Davis, Michael Keaton, the guy who played the principal in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Catherine O'Hara, Winona Ryder. It's really like a star-studded cast, really. Like a lot of nostalgic. I mean, some people who weren't necessarily super famous at the time, but in fact, yeah, this is kind of before all of them got into stardom, which is really cool. It's actually, I mean, Michael Keaton, I think, was a big draw because of his comedy, and that's probably why he felt okay taking the risk with it. But very unique character, the whole background. I'm actually going to do a review of the first Beetlejuice, and we can go over how that movie came about. But I liked it. I really did like that movie. I thought it was very good. And one of the reasons that I was very surprised by it was the fact that Beetlejuice is not in it very much. Like, the titular character is actually he's kind of inserted in here and there, and so that you're not relying too much on this guy who's just wacky, and like the poster boy. Like, literally, you're actually building up the story. Here with this film, I feel like I'll just say this. I was worried about Tim Burton. Not too worried because I wasn't that big of a fan of him. But I was worried about him initially because he had a pretty strong visual style and a pretty strong voice early on. I was always drawn to Edward Scissorhands. I thought was very good. I'm trying to think of what else I saw of his from the early days. Oh, Ed Wood is actually really good. That movie is really good. In fact, I want to give Ed Wood another watch because that was impressive. And then Sleepy Hollow was around the time where I think things started to shift. One of the things that I think Tim Burton I sometimes always get the sense with Tim Burton, and I'm no expert. There was once a Tim Burton exhibit at LACMA, and I didn't end up going, which shows you how much of a fan of Tim Burton I am. In that I'm a very fair weather fan. But I remember my roommate kept joking that like the narrator kept talking about how he was from Burbank, and every time they said it, it was like Burbank, and it was just like the most like Burbank's a very nice place. It's fine. It's like a very nice neighborhood in California, and it just made it sound like he was coming from like a dreadful place. But yeah, so Tim Burton early on, he had, I think, a lot of success with stuff like Beetlejuice, Nightmare Before Christmas, which a lot of people don't realize he didn't direct, but he did write, and I think he produced. And then you had Batman, obviously. Batman Returns. You had Edward Scissorhands, Ed Wood. And then there's a couple others that I'm kind of missing, but like you kind of get the point. He has a very strong production design style, and he has a very strong like camera style, and arguably I would say he's also good at directing actors for the most part to keep like a consistent sort of tone going, or not a consistent tone, but handling like many different tone shifts. One example of that maybe like not dating as well, not like aging as well, is like in the first Batman movie. I've always felt like it's very iconic overall, but there's just certain parts in there like the Prince music and the like the "you want to get nuts, let's get nuts" line, where like it just, you're almost like, where did that come from? Like like this seems very foreign to all this. But that, you know, who knows? I don't know, like whether he was the one behind the Prince music and Batman. I think that kind of bleeds into my other point, which is that sometimes I wonder if his if studio like the studio is really getting involved. Sometimes I wonder how strong Burton was in resisting certain studio decisions, or if he went with his own decisions when. You know, you don't always want to blame the studios for this. Sometimes directors can be really stupid. Then there's also the fact that CGI became more prominent in the last 20 years, especially. And if you look at like, I saw the last Burton movie that I really, I think, paid attention to. I didn't see either of the Alice in Wonderland films. Gosh, those movies look so... at the time, I was even like, what is this? This is like sludge. It just looks so computerized and dull. And that's, I'll refer back. I'll get reference. Those will be referenced as we go on. But yeah, that's the example of where like he really lost me. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and at first I kind of liked. I thought it was like kind of weird and a little zany, but it also runs into this, the color palettes are like so unpleasant to look at, and it just doesn't have the same character, and there's a lot of fake stuff, like just CGI. And the thing that I'm always like with this movie kind of proves it. My theory with special effects is that if there's a certain point where you've promised the audience realism. Jurassic Park is kind of that point, right? Like you see the big dinosaur and you're like, okay, this is going to be like, we're recreating dinosaurs in this. But then there's also the movies where you have almost set up the world in a charming sort of way, and you've charmed the audience into that sort of world. And it's like maybe a little whimsical. And I think that's where you can kind of get away with some more rudimentary kind of effects. And you might even be better advised to like shift towards those kinds of effects, even in this day and age. Good example of that is like Wes Anderson. A lot of times his movies are very much like plays. They're like cinematic plays. And he'll have miniatures, and he'll have like little curtains and stuff, and like weird things like that. I'm trying to think of stop motion when stop motion has been like used. People will be able to tell me at some point, or people can get, comment on it. But I mean, there's a lot of movies where they do this. They kind of figure out what they can get away with, or what their budget is best spent on. Should they be aiming for this super realistic style, or maybe something a little kind of, dare I say, cheesy but charming, kind of thing. Anyways, with this film, I could tell he kind of was returning to form. And I had heard, you hear a lot about sequels coming back. Zoolander 2, Dumb and Dumberer, Anchorman 2. There were a lot of sequels where I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, why do these exist? Like, I mean, and the answer is money. But you're just like, man, like, could we not have just left the first ones alone? Like, I don't know if this movie needed a sequel. Gladiator is one we will talk about, because this actually is sort of between Gladiator. I mean, this will be between Gladiator and Top Gun 2, I think. Gladiator 2 and Top Gun 2. But yeah, with I mean, I'll do a list sometime in the near future where I'll talk about it. But there are certain movies that, like, I thank God we didn't get a sequel to, and one of them is Master and Commander. And the reason for that is that I feel like they probably wouldn't have been able to do it as well the second time around. That movie is so good, and sometimes when they're so into, there's just a lot that they, I don't know if they could have they might have been able to match it. Top Gun 2 is actually a good example of that. Top Gun 2, I was not wanting a sequel to. I was like, there's no way you're going to be able to recreate the 80s Reagan era of military might. The director Tony Scott had killed himself, unfortunately. Val Kilmer, was addled from cancer, and like there's like so much that the planes aren't as cool. I mean, like, and maybe some of it's nostalgia, but like the 80s also, I barely grew up in the 80s. I was like born just at the end of the 80s, and you can't deny that there's an aura in that 80s space, like that California 80s space, that just was like very remarkable, and like it's just iconic. And if you put on top of that the fact that, like, the script for Top Gun, you've got a very unconventional story going on, because you have what would be considered villains, or like antagonists in the traditional sense, but they're all pretty faceless, and you don't even know what country they're from. Like, all the fighter planes they're up against are MiGs, and there's a lot of analysis over whether they're North Korean, Chinese, like what they are. They're not Russian, but there's a lot of different, like, there's clues, but I think they're supposed to be like a mystery force, there's no definitive answer. But the story's really about the protagonist, Maverick, going up against himself and going up against his other crewmates, I guess you could say, because they're, flyers on a ship, and ultimately reconciling, like, with all those forces before he actually has to fight the enemy in the end. And I think it's done, like, people make a lot of fun of Maverick, and they try to make it sound, or they make a lot of fun of Top Gun, and they try to make it sound homoerotic and all this stuff. But I've always really respected the story. I mean, I think that, like, that Pete Mitchell's struggle is it just comes off very real, and there's a lot that he has to deal with. And I think that the theme of friendship is very strong, and the theme of duty and loyalty is strong, and it's a good story. And it's one of my favorite movies, but like I've gotten away from the things that, like, originally drew me in, like the military aspect and the music and all that stuff. I've more, like, over the years, I've actually looked at a lot of movies that I liked, and I've had to analyze, like, does this hold up? Like, does this hold up to analysis? And I'd say Top Gun, it does. Now, when the sequel rolled around, I was very nervous because of all the things that I said. I was like, it's going to probably take lightning in a bottle to make this work, and I just don't know if we're going to be able to pull that off. So maybe you just shouldn't try. And they proved me wrong to a large degree. I still like the first one better than the second one, but the second one is very good. And it's a good story, and it's a great example of, like, one of the things. This is becoming a Top Gun podcast. I'm sorry, I like that movie a lot, but it will roll back around to Beetlejuice, and there's a theme here in its sequels. So Top Gun, one of the things that's very interesting about that movie is that they never use the same songs that they used for Pete and Charlie's relationship. Mainly, You've Lost That Love and Feeling and Take My Breath Away. Those songs don't show up. And it's because it's a new chapter. And he's not worried about his dad anymore. He kind of came to peace with that. He's more focused on Goose because Goose's son has come up and broken his peace, so to speak. And it's a new chapter of, like, figuring out, okay, how does Maverick embrace almost the teacher-father role as opposed to the Maverick. You actually see development in Pete Mitchell's character, which is awesome. And that's what I love to see. I hate it when sequels come back around. Well, hate is a strong word. Sometimes there's a reason for this, but there's a lot of times they'll act like you're kind of crazy if you point it out, where you're like, the characters don't seem to have changed at all, even though we saw them change at the end of the first movie. Like, why are they still making the same mistakes? Why are they still so dumb? Like, why is the guy divorced again? Like, Legend of Zorro is a great example of that. Oh my gosh, they totally... I'll keep myself from using foul language, but they blew that shot so badly. You had a great setup there, and Aliens probably with Alien Cubed, as people like to call it. But anyways, I digress. I've been so off track. Getting back to, okay, so sequels and certain movies where sequels weren't really meant to be made for them. My Cousin Vinny is another great example of this. And I'd always heard about rumors, mainly from Kevin Smith, back when he was actually funny, I guess. I don't know. I never found Kevin Smith all that great. But I did find the stories that he told about the industry funny. Now I wonder how much of what he was telling is true, because I feel like he's stoned 95% of the time, so you wonder how much of this happens in his own head. Anyways, when he first got fame in Hollywood, it was like kind of one of the Cinderella stories. He got brought into studios, and they had scripts for him to work on, because I guess while he was maybe working on his stuff, they were gonna like throw him a script to work on. So the two options that he had were The Death of Superman and Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian, which almost sounded like a bad joke. Like that you would push those two scripts to the guy and be like, which one do you want? And it almost seemed like the studio was like, we don't know what to do with either of these. And when I was younger, I was always like, oh man, The Death of Superman. I mean, of course I'd do that. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that would be awesome. A Superman movie? Like, who wouldn't want to do that? But he always kind of talked about like it was like almost like they were taking these from the bottom of the barrel. But maybe it was at the time when the studios still didn't quite know what to make of superhero movies. I mean, Superman and Batman had been done, but it took X-Men and Spider-Man to really kick that off before Marvel Studios started. But ultimately, he ended up going with Superman, and he kind of poo-pooed the idea of Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian, which, to be fair, it does sound like, I always thought if you're going to make a sequel, like, that's almost like the cliche kind of Hollywood sequel. Like, oh, well, what if we just put them in a different environment and kind of like have them, I don't know, like like it's all, I'm trying to think, there is a couple of examples that have been done like this, where they basically just been like, oh yeah, put them in Hawaii. Like, we'll just have them do this thing in Hawaii. Maybe like the Brady Bunch. I don't know. But like, anyways, with all that, I feel like I was always sort of like, yeah, that probably is a good thing that they never made a sequel to Beetlejuice. And I think the fact that Tim Burton didn't want to get on board is probably an indicator of that to a certain degree, because you can't get away from the fact that as much as the original writer of Beetlejuice did contribute a lot of the story, I think, Tim Burton contributed a lot of style. I think he he peered into the soul of that movie and kind of made it his own. Obviously, you can definitely feel his stamp on there, and it's why the Joel Schumacher Batmans are so different from the Burton ones. You can't just remake, or even I don't know, look at the Flash, where Michael Keaton comes back as Batman, and it's just, you can try to recreate that, but if you're not the guy, it's going to take a lot of work, and you're usually not going to be successful. So the studio never made it. It sounded like it was a bit of a cash grab. When this came up, I did kind of think, I was like, gosh, really? What's the deal with Michael Keaton? He did Birdman, where he was kind of playing the caricature of the guy who he didn't want to play the superhero anymore. He wanted to focus on serious stuff. He kind of almost he had almost broken ties with that background, and it was the start of his renaissance. And then he ends up doing Spider-Man Homecoming, and he does Batman as in the Flash, and then Batman and Batgirl, and then he does Beetlejuice again. And to me, it was I don't know if you were you really serious about reinventing yourself? But that's me being cut off from the situation. I mean, who knows what's going on? Who knows what's being promised? I will say it was hilarious. I mean, when Batgirl got canceled, and when I say canceled, I mean they shot the entire movie and then they deleted it. They literally deleted it. Apparently it was that bad. When that got canceled, his response was, well, I don't really care about that. I made money. I made money on it. And I'm kind of to a certain degree, I'm like, okay, yeah. I mean, you're an actor. You get paid to do, you don't have to have a bleeding heart over everything, especially if what you're working on is not very good. Now, granted, I probably, if I were him, I would have been a little bit more careful reprising my Batman character if I was really that. Yeah, especially given the fact that he didn't do Batman Returns supposedly on principle because Burton wasn't attached. Or no, I'm sorry, Batman Forever, I think, was the name of that was the sequel that Val Kilmer was in. But he did Batman Returns, and then there was another one, and it was going to be called something. I can't remember what the title was. It was a cool sounding round out to the whole Batman trilogy, but Tim Burton didn't want to do it because I think the studio was pushing him to do stuff that he didn't want to do. So he dropped out, and then Michael Keaton dropped out, and they pushed $15 million in from 90s money, $15 million, which is would have been crazy amount of money. It's a crazy amount of money today to pay an actor, but it's, man, and he walked away. So it always kind of made me wonder, why did he come back for The Flash? Why did he come back for Batgirl? These movies were clearly, not going to be that great. They didn't seem to be very strong visions. And, I mean, to quote Jeremy Irons, I needed another beach house, so I did Aragon or Dungeons and Dragons. I can't remember which one he did for the beach house money. Probably, I think it was Aragon, and it's just Mercenary, which is fine. That's your job. So when he reprised Beetlejuice, I was curious because I know that he kind of held that character close to, I feel like he's known. It's one of his most iconic characters, and I feel like there was something always kind of special about it. And I actually did a little bit of research before I saw the movie, and it did he talked about how there was always talk of a sequel, but ultimately they wouldn't do it unless certain parameters were met. And one of them was that Beetlejuice wouldn't show up in the movie as much. And I think that's because they realized that they had really done a great thing by not using him as a crutch for the first movie. And he's only in there about like 10 to 15 minutes total. And that's in a 90-minute movie. So I think that's very smart. I think that's like that shows good standards, and I guess you pick and choose where you want to apply those. I mean, Batman had been sort of done to death by the time he was coming back around with it, and maybe he needed the money. With this, it seemed like he was a little bit more careful, and I think it is because he made this character largely like Tim Burton had a vision for this character. It was going to be, actually, I think originally he wanted him to be Sammy Davis Jr. And I think originally it was going to be much darker, and he was going to be a much more like scary demon. And I think Michael Keaton had the idea. I'm still working through the original script, so I'll confirm this for my number one review, but I'm pretty sure Michael Keaton brought like the humor and the trickster aspect to it, which I think is what makes the character so easy to sort of get along with in the movie, so to speak, because he is a horrible person and is not to be trusted. My initial overview of the story, because we're going to get into spoilers here, is I think it's good. I liked it. Actually, I'll take it back a notch. I don't know how good it really is in terms of writing. There are some issues in the plot and the story that I kind of saw that I need to look into as to whether or not I'm kind of shooting from the hip here because I want to get this out relatively soon. But I think it's I liked it. I liked the look of it. I liked the style. I thought the casting was pretty good. Justin Theroux got on my nerves, I'll be honest. I thought there were certain scenes that went on a little bit too long. It runs, I think, about 15 minutes longer than the original, maybe 20 minutes, and I think they could have really cut some stuff, or cut certain parts down that would have helped with that. I thought the humor in it there was good humor overall, but it does range on being kind of like, I mean, this is not a movie you want to take your kids to. And the first one, I think, was borderline okay. There's like one F word, and that was unfortunate because the rest of the movie is kind of wacky and funny. Although it is a little grotesque. This one, they take the grotesque and gory nature up to like a pretty large degree, not like terrible, but there are certain parts where I was like, ooh, that's like way more gruesome than I remember the first one ever really being. Because the violence or the implicit violence was always sort of playful in the first one. Although I guess Gina Davis does like rip her face off and all that stuff. I don't know. I thought the effects were really good in this. They did a good job with the practical effects. I heard that they were doing practical effects mostly to try to tie it close to the original. I think I honestly, like, there's not too much to complain about from that angle. I mean, I will say the makeup, there was some makeup stuff that was a little janky. And I don't know what to think of that, because I think the first one, if you're using that as a standard, did have a certain aspect of camp where you're like, oh, like, these people are clearly just wearing green face paint, like, to look ghoulish. But, like, there's a character played by Willem Dafoe, who does a great job, by the way. He's, like, basically, like, if they're looking for a character like the way that Lloyd Bridges used to play comedy, Willem Dafoe is the guy. Like, he's proved it in this movie. Like, I don't know, sign him up for an Airplane remake or something like that. But anyways, he's got like a exposed brain because of an accident that he was in, and you can just clearly see it's fake. It's like plastic and stuff. And I just was a little curious about that because I do remember in the first one, the wounds and stuff all looked kind of real and gruesome. But this did not look, it looked a little, it looked cartoonish and like costume. So I don't know what was going on there. I don't know why. I don't know. Maybe I missed something. What else? Yeah, I mean, basically, I found it to be a very entertaining movie, and the people in the theater were laughing. There's a lot of funny parts in it. There's some shocking parts. The one thing that I like is that it almost is an equal opportunity offender. There was a time in the 90s where it was cool to, if you were going to like make fun of the quote normies, they were always like Christian and uptight and like typical suburbia, kind of like, like those conservative types. And now they kind of do the same thing, but they've shifted it to be like making fun of the cringy, like, woke people, and they don't do it in like a hugely obvious way. And like I said, like, it's an equal opportunity thing. Like, there's a religious pastor in this who's, for lack of a better word, he's kind of a pussy, and he's also like, I don't know, that takes a couple of very light jabs at Christianity, and makes it look out to be like a stuffy religion, so to speak. So like that's the kind of stuff I can swallow. I'm like, okay, yeah, I guess it's like fine. But I was sort of surprised that it seemed like it was a little bit more in touch than a lot of these other movies that want it to seem like we're still living in this punk era of like, yeah, we're the rebels, man. And like all those, majority, the flyover states, they just like, they're, or not necessarily flyover states, but like those in like white suburbia and stuff like that. They're just a bunch of squares and, kind of like the David Lynch, like underneath everything, they're all just corrupt but they like to put on this, Pleasantville kind of, facade. And I think it was cool that they kind of shifted to the modern era that we're in, where it's like, no, these people have adopted a new religion. It's a political one, and essentially it's cringy. It's just as cringy as if somebody was preaching on a street corner, it's just the kind of thing where, wow, okay, great. We've updated it for, like, I guess in this case we have updated it for modern audiences, but in this case, Hollywood actually seems to be somewhat in touch with the way the world's shifting. So that was cool. Other than that, I mean, I know that this isn't like a super comprehensive review. I'm trying not to spoil stuff, but I would say Michael Keaton's great in it. He does a great job. He's very entertaining. He brings it. Winona Ryder is fine. Unfortunately, she seems like the oldest person in the movie, which makes me kind of sad because she's probably substantially younger than Catherine O'Hara and Michael Keaton, who have both aged. At least Michael Keaton's under so much makeup that it's not hard to hide his aging. But Catherine O'Hara has aged very, very well. And I'm trying to think of who else came back from the first one. I think that's about it. Who were the mainstays? The father is not around for the Mr. Dietz is not around for, if you want to look into why that is. It's unfortunate and pretty disgusting. But he has not been asked to return because of a scandal that was not good. So he unfortunately is a disgraced actor by his own doing, and should probably not be included, I think, because of his actions. But then let's see. Yes, the casting I thought was all good. The music was good. They brought some new songs in that were really good. There was a reference to kind of in that Top Gun thing they didn't really do, in that they referenced this one song from the first one that's very iconic. And I guess it's fine, but I just was kind of not super having it. Yeah. I would recommend it. I would tell people if they're interested in seeing this movie, go ahead and go see it and see it in the theater. This was a good theater going experience for me. Despite the fact that I don't really like going to theaters anymore because I feel like they're kind of soulless. I feel like they're not necessarily just like these black hallways and people in t-shirts walking around with brooms. But I will say I was sitting in the theater and I was kind of enjoying myself. And I was alone. So that was, I mean, there were other people, but I was the weirdo sitting there by myself laughing at it, which is sometimes you just have those days. In this case, it was because I was there reviewing the movie and my wife doesn't really like stuff like this. So, that's fine. Yeah, so that's kind of the overall review. I'd say that, if you like this, if you like the look of it, go ahead and go see it. If you're looking for something that's fun and different, maybe watch the first one first, because if I were to rank them, I would say that this ranks below the first one. I don't think you would be able to. I personally would not have seen this alone and thought that it was enough. It probably would have charmed me, but the first one I think is a way better story. And then the other thing, I guess if I were to give it a number rating, and I use the every frame pause metric of 1 through 10. So in other words, when it comes to whether or not I'm gonna give it, like, it's not like on a B C D F scale. It's not on 10% to 100%. It's basically just like on a scale. So middle, like a fine movie would end up being a 5. That would be like an average, like it does a job and does it okay. And then above that, you're getting into other territory. Like I said, I still have to analyze the story and the plot. I'm really bad about that, by the way. I'm always bad about tracking that stuff and whether or not it all makes sense. But I will say I would probably give this 5 to a 6, which sounds bad. That sounds like I'm giving it an F, but in reality, it's just that middle of the road. Like, it does the job. It does the job. If you would like to hear more, tune back in to my channel. Look for other videos. I don't necessarily have an Instagram or a X account or a Facebook. I don't even know. Do people even use Facebook anymore? I'm not a big social media guy, but I do have a podcast. It's called the Gentleman Scofflaw Podcast, and I'll be posting these every once in a while there, but I'll also be posting them on this channel. And then there will be, I think what the goal will be is that eventually I'll start moving the theatrical release reviews behind a paywall. I don't think I'm going to do that with this one, but time will tell, because it did take me a while to do this. And I think it's going to take me a while to maybe edit some of the stuff for this. So we'll see. But I really enjoy talking to you. And I guess I will catch you next time. Thank you very much.